For a discussion on electricity supply in South Africa, I'm now joined by energy analyst, Professor Hartmut Winkler. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for your time. 3 months of uninterrupted power supply. We haven't seen this since 2021.
Yes, well, if I was a betting man, I would have lost a lot of money because while I expected that the decline was going to stop, I didn't think that I would have never dreamt of us having 100 days without load shedding. We're certainly not out of the woods yet, so don't be completely surprised if something goes wrong somewhere or other and we end up going back to stage 4 or so. But it's very clear that on average this year we're doing a lot better than we were doing last year. In retrospect, one can always come up with quite a number of reasons. It's not just a single reason. There's several reasons why things are looking a bit better. But would we have foreseen that? I think we just have been too used to be pessimistic about Eskom and electricity. So it's a very pleasant surprise.
Well, not yet out of the woods, but turning the tide nevertheless. Now, Eskom says this is because they're properly and effectively executing their generation operational recovery plan. What's so unique about, this plan, that which nothing before it could do?
Ultimately, they haven't made as big a difference as you might imagine. Okay, we don't have stage 6 load shedding, we have nothing, but ultimately it's only a relatively small improvement in the performance of their plants. They did, over the Christmas period and during the summer months, do proper maintenance, and I think they were a lot more careful about it. It wasn't the sort of crisis management they were, don't want to say forced to, but that they were doing in previous years. So there's been a little bit more of a systematic approach, and I think this electricity crisis has forced Eskom to really do a serious introspection. And I think ultimately they've come out of it the better for it. I think they've learned from a lot of the things that have gone wrong, and hopefully they're not going to repeat some of the mistakes again. I think it was a general sort of sense of disorganization, and we've had reports of the situation at many of the power plants, and there were just a lot of things which just were not the way you would expect them to be at a strategic institution like that. So well done to Eskom. They have slightly reduced the number of power stations that are out of action. The number is still very high. I'm sure they would still love to do a lot better than they are, but that's been one of the factors which has improved the situation. The other one is, well, I suppose it's linked. The fact that Kgosientsho, the 3 units which were down for the whole of last year, are now back up again. That's made over 2 stages of load shedding difference. They've just had yet another one of the units which hadn't been finished yet coming online, so that's also helped. And the other reason is the main reason I would say is because of so many people have gone and installed solar rooftop.
And they did this, or they've pulled this off, the Minister of Electricity keeps reminding us, without burning a lot more diesel.
Yes, that's correct. There have been rumors doing the rounds that diesel was being burnt excessively, and that the day the elections are over, we would be thrown into all sorts of darkness. That wasn't true. One could see that if one looks at it. Luckily, these days, Eskom does make their generation data available in some detail. So if one looks at the amount of diesel that was being burnt over the first 6 months of this year, it is lower than last year. Last year, they were really forced to do it. Burning diesel is the most expensive way of generating electricity. It's only meant to be done when you really are short. But given that last year, that was the situation most of the time, they were really burning far more diesel than is economically sensible. But it's just something they were forced into. This year, they have been able to do it much more sparingly.
Now, when Andre de Ruyter, the former CEO, left in February last year, as we all know, load shedding was a daily occurrence. We're bracing ourselves for higher stages, 6, 8, and above even. Now, a lot has been said about the influence and leadership of the minister, Dr. Ramokgopa, the board chair, Mteto Nyati, the CEO, Mr. Dan Marokane, the CFO, Khalib Qasim, and the generation executive, Beki Nxumalo. How much of an influence do you think or reckon they have, these people have really had in what we're experiencing currently?
I think they all contributed, and I think, and if you look at, I think the minister, as much as the minister cannot really do much directly, he performed very well in sort of just calming the nation, having his regular press updates, telling us exactly where the issues were. Also, the fact that he was visiting these power stations, and that this was really his prime function, I think helped build the morale at Eskom. But I think what we managed to get is much more sort of unity in purpose. Before that, we had two ministries which were looking at approaching the electricity crisis from a completely different angles. There was tension. And now you brought in a third person in there. In a sense, that worsened the situation, but that was, I think, only temporary. Once it became clear that the functioning of Eskom was essentially under the leadership of Dr. Ramokgopa, I think things did a lot better. You mentioned the acting CEO from last year, who had to hold the organization together for quite a while. I think he also did very well, but it's not only him. You mentioned the various senior executives there. Eskom cannot be run or changed overnight by a single person. It really is a team effort. And I think these people just decided that let's stop fighting, let's just do what we can, and let's do things properly the way they should have been done. And I think we've seen the results.
Is it particularly significant that this has been achieved or was achieved as winter was approaching all the way into it?
Yes, it is, because the consumption in winter is always quite a lot higher than before. That's why the maintenance work usually happens, especially over the summer months, but also going into the autumn and spring months. At the moment, they really are trying to run every station that they can, and it's sufficient to keep the country going. I think what's also helping a bit, we have this early evening peak. That's when the danger of load shedding, the danger of exceeding the demand is at its very highest. The fact that so many people have now installed solar rooftop and associated with this come batteries, storage facilities. Even if you don't have solar, very often people have installed batteries in their homes. That smooths this evening peak quite a bit. So it just means that at the time when Eskom needs to provide most of its electricity, quite a bit of it is in essence already stored in those batteries. So it means that they don't have to provide as much during those critical hours as they normally would. But yes, going into winter right now, we've just passed the longest night of the year, and we're probably at our very coldest period right now. It's looking fairly promising. As I said, don't be surprised if something can always go wrong. We just don't know when breakages will occur. I suppose there's been a little bit of an element of luck as well. So we could still see some load shedding, but by and large, I think the situation is looking a lot more positive.
You touched, Prof, on something I was going to ask next, which is the role played by the fact that lots and lots more businesses and households are trying to be independent of the grid.
Yes, that ultimately is actually, as much as it sounds good news for Eskom, and it is at the moment, it's not good news for them in the long run, because these are usually have been some of their best customers. And the fact that their best customers are now partly, at least, relying on other sources of electricity just simply means that Eskom it doesn't need to produce as much electricity as they used to, but it also means they're selling less electricity than they used to. And ultimately, if this continues, and especially now with the talk of huge increases in electricity tariffs, it's going to drive more people away from Eskom. And it just means ultimately Eskom is going to be collecting less money than they would otherwise. It's something that's very dangerous for Eskom to take into the medium-term future. They might be able to do this for right now, but sooner or later, it's going to work against them. So ultimately, Eskom needs to come up with other ways of securing its finances. It needs to reinvent itself, basically. They've been too used to this the single model of we produce electricity, you give us the money. They need to come up with other ideas. It's been done before. If you think of Telkom was being challenged by the cellular phone companies. They would have gone completely under if they hadn't made major changes and reinvented themselves. I think Eskom must do the same. They're already talking of essentially setting up competition to the private independent power producers. Eskom's now talking of building their own solar plants and so on. And I think that's right. They need to be thinking along those lines.
Professor Winkler, thank you very much for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.